the internet. Hey guys, welcome back to the stream. We're just testing out some features. Michael, you can be heard, you can hear us. Great. Let's bring in...
I can hear you.
Great. Let's bring in Pascoe. So, let's see if this works. Let's try this one.
I can see everybody.
Yeah. Let me try this one. I think because I had to reset the internet. Aha! Cool. So I'm going to mute Jordan and Bon. That's okay. And then we'll bring these guys in very soon. Let's try that. How fun is the NBN? So for some reason, Bon is still on the feed. Bizarre. No, everyone's still on the feed. That's cool. Here we go. Hired. That's the setting I want. Over to Pascoe. 3, 2, 1. Let's go. 3, 2, 1. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Working out some kinks. This should be much higher quality now, because I'm literally hotspotting off my phone instead of the NBN that I pay hundreds of dollars for. How good? How is everyone doing back on the stream? Much better.
I'm here.
Okay, so I think we had a question for Mr. Here we go, Mr. Pascoe. No, where'd the question go? Okay, so here's a question that we had from one of our viewers. Michael, Mr. Pascoe, does Pascoe think that there has to be a loser in the housing debate? Example, renters or investors. You know, is this a winner or a loser situation, or can we come out with something a bit more equitable?
To make it work, we have to come up with something more equitable. No, we do not want housing prices to fall, because our economy is somewhat built on it. What we have to hope for is how housing prices to only rise quite slowly from here on out, while we build affordable social housing to take out of the market all the people who shouldn't be there, who can't afford to be there. You know, it was a boast of the last year's federal election, that when the government increased Commonwealth rent assistance, that 1 million renters would be getting increased CRA. That's nothing to boast about. That's an admission of failure, that there are 1 million renters needing Commonwealth rent assistance to be able to have any standard of living while paying rent. So an equitable outcome is a rapid push into the affordable community social housing side to bring some equity to the most needy sector, and that in turn would cool down the rest of the market. There's no magic solution, there's no easy solution, and there'll be pockets of any market as diverse as this that will go up and go down. But if you want a better society, if you want to end up with the sort of Australia that we want to end up with, that we don't want to have a permanent underclass being tossed around between private rentals without any sort of security or continuity of schooling for the kids, we've got to do it. That's it.
Great answer. Any thoughts, Mr. West?
Well, as I said, I mean, there's a problem on the supply side, as Michael points out. You've got to build houses. Immigration is an issue that has to be moderated, and that's got to be fixed up. Well, that's a demand side thing, obviously. And then you've got the favoured skew towards investors And so both the Labor and Liberal housing policies just fiddle around the edges, and together they both just push house prices higher, particularly the Liberal one. If everybody suddenly decides to dip into their super and get tax breaks, so that's effectively subsidising first home buyers through the tax system. It's not, they're just, neither of them are viable. They've just got to make it simple, build houses, which they haven't done yet. They bought a few, apparently, but they need to build houses and they need to fix negative gearing and CGT relief, because until they do that, they're just, and there's a political problem with it, as we've discussed. It's 60% of people own their own house. So the politicians are always going to decide in favour of the majority in order to get the votes. So there's an entrenched issue there, but it's only going to lead to more unfairness, and it's really reached crisis level. I mean, people in the younger demographics have figured it out. They figured out the system doesn't work and that their parents had it easy, and that will only lead to lack of social cohesion. So it has to be fixed, or we're going to live in a more unfair society.
Well, even the fact that, I'm the token younger person here at Michael West Media. I went back to my hometown the other day. Small coastal town, about 5,000 people. There was about 3,500 before I moved out at the young age of 16. And I went for a walk, right? And I was looking around, and 1 in every 3 houses had a holiday rental sign out the front of it, right? So they weren't lived in. It was all of that very plastic, cheap Kmart furniture. You can kind of tell when a house has not been lived in. And I grew up in these streets, and I would kick around and meet kids on the street, because we didn't really have cell phones back then, because there weren't any cell phone towers, because we were quite isolated. So the fact that now I've gone back to my hometown, and then I've gone to check out the real estate listings, because that's what you do once you hit 30. And number one, I can't afford to rent in my hometown, and I can't afford to buy in my hometown. And this is not a paradise place. It's a small coastal town on the upper north coast that's never had any major investment in it. We have 1 bus a day that goes to the city, and it costs $25. Well, actually, it's probably $40 now, because it was $25 when I was a kid. So, I can't even imagine the people that have insecure work or don't have full-time jobs. How do they afford to live in their own towns? It's just getting absolutely ridiculous. And especially young people as well, I feel the brunt of that.
You've nailed the other issue here, this vacancy issue. Just around, I live in Manly in Sydney, and just around me, there is just a bunch of places, apartments, with no lights on. I doubt the water's even on. So the question is, if, the problem is, and we've identified this, the Airbnb tax rort, we called it, because, again, investors have been favoured over, first home owners and people that want to actually live with a roof over their head and buy somewhere or rent somewhere. But there's a whole lot of places around that are just vacant, that may be let out on weekends. And the problem is there that you get tax breaks. You can claim deductions on your holiday house if you let it out on Airbnb for a year, as long as it's publicly listed for let. You get your tax breaks, so you can just do your work tax effectively on your holiday home, rent it out for a couple of days a year, if that, a few weeks maybe, at a high price, and people can't live in that home. So there's all sorts of things which are easily fixable. But of course, we get down to that issue of lobbyists and vested interests controlling the politicians.
Yeah, and I think this is actually probably a perfect segue to bring in our next guest as well. So this man has been caught a lot of online attention over the last year and a half, I'd say. Got quite big on Instagram. He might fact check me on this one, but he's the creator of the website called shitrentals.com, and also a really big housing advocate down in Victoria. So talking about the vacant housing, I think that's the perfect time to segue into our new guest, Mr. Purplepingers, otherwise known as Jordan. So let me just click on, here we go. Welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Cool. Audio levels looking all good. So you've been listening to us ramble on about housing for the last 20 minutes. But mate, can you give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself before we continue the conversation?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm a housing advocate and a rental advocate, and also, advocate for people who don't have access to the things that they need to survive, most importantly, housing. And yeah, so I started shitrentals.org so people can review their rentals and stuff like that, and just try shift that power imbalance a little. But I've also advocated for squatting all these vacant, empty, abandoned homes that we have around the country. And I've got a lot of, opinions on the whole supply and demand kind of argument that's going on between the parties at the moment.
And when you talk about these vacant houses and stuff, are they all of like varying quality? They're not like McMansions being abandoned. Are they run down? Are you seeing what kind of vacancies are we seeing?
Yeah, well, I've been into quite a few of them, and quite frankly, most of them that I've been into are of a better standard than the average rental that is being rented out, at least in Melbourne.
Oh, I'm sure we've all got some bad rental stories, especially at this age.
So how are you
Yeah,
seeing the major
well, I
party
think
how are you seeing the major party policies, Jordan? The latest little tweaks.
Shit. Yeah, it's like, so economists have described it as a dumpster fire, both of them. They do literally nothing to help renters, their new announcements. And yeah, they're going to make housing more unaffordable. But I also think there's something major that kind of even here we've missed a little bit. We keep on talking about the need to increase supply. However, if we increase supply to a level, if we keep building more homes that no one can afford, that is not going to do anything. At the moment, what we're seeing, particularly in Victoria, which is where we have, the most available data for this, at the last census, we had approximately 30,000 people in the entire state of Victoria experiencing homelessness. But in metropolitan Melbourne alone, excluding places like the Mornington Peninsula, which is, where a lot of those empty kind of beach house places are, there were 97,000 empty homes in metropolitan Melbourne alone. So that's more than 3 times as many empty homes in metropolitan Melbourne than people experiencing homelessness in the entire state of Victoria. The average house can house more than one person. So what we're seeing, sure, yes, we do need to build more public housing, but we're seeing a distribution issue at the moment. It's not really so much a supply and demand issue, because at the moment, house growth, a number of houses has grown faster than population growth in this country. What we're seeing is those homes are not being distributed. And it's really frustrating that no major party wants to talk about this, because they would like to have rich people that vote for them that have spare houses lying around for decades. And that pisses me off.
Which gets back to the tax issue, right? And the negative gearing and the capital gains tax relief being skewed in favour of investors, because it pays to have your house vacant.
Exactly. Why wouldn't you? If you had a spare 100K, you would be stupid in our economy that our politicians have created to not chuck it in a house. You don't have to rent it out. That house will dramatically increase in value, whether or not you rent it out, develop it, or do whatever. The land that it's on will just keep going up and up and up. So, like, why would you not just have a spare house lying around and then sell it in 20 years or whatever? It's stupid.
Especially when you don't pay capital gains tax on your win. So there are people at the top end, like we've done stories on it, the mansion flipping epidemic, where they bought the house for 10 million, they sold it for 30 million, and they've made, $20 million, which is tax free. So the question, of course, is, and combined with the deluge of foreign capital coming in and a lot of sales to the Chinese, etc., foreign investors. The question is, why would you bother reinvesting your wealth in anything but property? If you're going to get more than 10%, you can make a $20 million gain. So that top end is dragging everybody up, sustained by this, Ponzi scheme of foreign capital coming in, and that drags all property prices up. And of course, there's a transparency issue with it, because you can't actually see. A lot of this stuff can be hidden. So it's there are serious issues.
Absolutely. It's not even just foreign capital on its own, though. It's our own capital. It's
It's
like
our own
we are
capital too.
incentivized
Yeah.
here to do that. We have people land banking heaps more that I come across that are Australian citizens and Australian residents that I've been inside the homes of than we do that don't live here. That's what I found, at least personally.
Absolutely. So it makes no economic sense, does it? Because if you were to put your wealth in a business which employed people, then that would help drive economic growth as well. So it's just lazy capital built on investor tax breaks and favourable sort of housing going up forever, this market going up forever. So it's just lazy capital. It doesn't make any economic sense at all. But of course, the politicians do not want to touch it because 2/3 of the voters,
Yeah, and themselves.
and themselves.
Actually, you're there. Yeah.
Actually,
Well,
on
is it
that,
70% of 70% of politicians own a second house or more? Is
It'd
that the
definitely be
stats?
more than that
Here we
because
go.
of their blind trusts and shit like that.
Well, didn't that story come out about Dutton a couple of weeks ago, which like has kind of fizzled out now, but about him owning a $30 million worth of property, right? And how can we help, not to pick a certain political party over one another, but how do we trust anyone who has a conflict of interest such as that, let alone $30 million worth of property, to then solve the housing crisis? Like, it just goes against their own interests.
30, I think it was 30. The number was 30 properties over, bought and sold. And the number, his actual property wealth would be a lot higher than 30 million, I'd say. But then again, it gets to the transparency issue, because you see, you don't actually have to disclose. If you're holding property in a trust and you've got your trust structured properly, you don't actually have to disclose what assets you have. This is fundamental to the problem. So as Jordan said, the numbers are probably far higher than the 70% disclosed. Many would own multiple properties, and many would have them within trusts, which they wouldn't have to disclose, whose assets they wouldn't have to disclose. So you've got transparency problems and huge conflicts of interest all over the place.
Absolutely.
But it's coming to a head. I mean, people are onto it. And this week, there's been a lot of anger. This is driving division in our society, because all the older people who've got their properties sitting on all this property wealth thanks to government policy decisions over the years, and you've got younger people that can't get set or have got to leave the city they're living in and go somewhere to get set in the property market. So it's hugely unfair. It's going to drive social dislocation eventually.
Yeah,
What's doing it now?
Like people are struggling.
I think it's already here.
Exactly.
I saw a really good post the other day where that when an issue comes to a head in this country, we only start really reporting on it once like the middle Australia starts to feel the effect, right? So like the average Australian starts to feel. So if we've got the average Australian starting to feel the housing crisis, what about everyone under that, the 49% under that? Like it's we only talk about the sad story, like the sad visible stories. The mum that can't afford to a single mum that can't afford a house, the man that's living in the street in his car and stuff. But like, what about the people that can't be seen below that, that aren't visible, that we don't have access to their stories in a sense because of the media gatekeeping? Like it is the situation must be so bad now that we're reporting that as a mainstream talking point. Like I'm lucky. I have a good rental. I get to have a good rental, Most of my friends are still renting, or they're lucky enough to buy a couple of years ago. But I know people who have fallen off the face of the earth because they couldn't live in the town that we grew up in. And you don't hear from them anymore. There's so many more layers of just like not being able to rent. It actually just changes your entire life. So yeah, to kind of put a pin in that point, the people that we don't see, that's who I'm worried about. And we're not really talking about those at the election. We're just talking about first home buyers, young people who are doing well, middle Australia.
Yeah, there's nothing on the table for people who are struggling at all. Not a single thing. It's just first home buyers. And it's like, oh, awesome. What about the people who will never be first home buyers?
What do we do about that?
Yeah.
And older people.
So
Yeah.
who've, for instance, there's a crisis with older women, I mean, 40 plus, who have come out of marriages and so on, who
Mhm.
are homeless. I mean, I see them around here, and it's terrible because they've got less access to superannuation because of the gender imbalance issue with superannuation. And then they come out of a difficult situation in life, and there's a huge problem with women homelessness out there, which all the women's groups attest to, but it's not talked about enough in the mainstream media. We're much more likely to see puff pieces about Instagram influencers than homeless women in their 50s, and it is a crisis. And there are, Josh, in your neck of the woods in Newcastle, there's a park apparently where the women gather together, and of course there's huge danger risk with sleeping rough at night and that kind of thing, but there's just not enough of a safety net, and these people have no voice, and that can only get worse unless there's drastic policy measures to address it. We should get Bonnie in on this because she'd have a good view
I
on
think
this.
Bonnie is one of your local representatives, actually, Mick. So I think that's a good opportunity. Just checking, Bon, you're still on the stream. Excellent. Let's bring you in. Here we go. Unhide. So, Bon, hello. Welcome to the stream. Oh, we can't hear you. Oh no! Have we got a
check?
Let's
1
try
2
that.
1 2.
Hello.
Hello. Can you hear me now?
A little bit choppy on the video end. Yes, we can. Bonnie, can you give us a little bit of an overview of yourself?
Of
Introduce
myself.
yourself.
I'm a newly elected councillor. I'm actually the Manly Ward councillor on Northern Beaches Council. So, yes, Mike, you can decide whether or not you want to re-elect me in 3.5 years. I'm a surfer. I'm an artist. I'm a student at UCID. I'm still living at home. I can't afford to move out at the moment. Not on my council salary, that's for sure. But it's good to be here. I'm a big fan of what you guys do.
So how are you seeing it in this part of the world, the homelessness and the housing crisis, Bonnie?
I can't speak to the latest stats in terms of homelessness, but an article came out the other day in Sydney Morning Herald that showed that a single person living on JobSeeker can afford literally like 0.00% of rentals in Warringah, and a couple on the pension similarly can afford 0. And if you are a couple and you are working but on minimum wage and you have 2 kids, you can afford 3.5% of rentals. So, great news for all those different groups of people. But yeah, we really hear from residents on the Northern Beaches that housing affordability is a huge issue, and they want council to take more action on it. It's something that sort of seems to span across not just young people, but young families trying to break into the market as well are just sort of captured by this hugely inflated rental market.
Well, I guess the media is dominating like the national election, obviously. But what kind of levers do you have to pull on a council level? Like, does council have any powers to kind of ease any of these pressures? Is there anything that you could do as a councillor or have been doing?
Yeah, so it was interesting hearing Michael Pascoe say before how, I think the Libs sometimes punch down on council saying, oh, if council would just get out of our way, we could do a whole bunch of stuff. Council has quite a bit of, not a huge amount of agency because we're sort of tethered by our limited bankroll. Councils are pretty chronically underfunded by state and federal, unfortunately. But we do have quite a bit of leverage when it comes to affordable housing, because at the end of the day, we are the ones responsible for rezoning. We are the ones sort of responsible for approving different development requests. So on Northern Beaches Council, we're pretty lucky because our staff have allowed us to acknowledge that affordable housing is a priority of residents. And we've begun a program of value capture through developer contribution funds. So when things are being rezoned, like up in French's Forest, you are seeing either apartments set aside for affordable housing or money going into developer contribution fund. And actually yesterday we got a really exciting nom through that one of my fellow Greens councillors put up, which was basically asking for a report back on opportunities for us to redevelop public land that is owned by council that's empty, or opportunities to sort of develop on top of community centres or public car parks. Because at this stage, we're sort of like, well, state and federal, we can't keep waiting around. They're not doing anything. So, you know, local council, if we have some money and if we have the land, why not start to sort of fill that gap ourselves?
Yeah, that's quite a good answer. I quite like that. Jordan, do you have any experience with your local council? Because obviously not every council is equal as well. Those are some interesting levers that I haven't really heard talked about before, but is there anything you'd like to add with what Bonnie just said?
Yeah, definitely. I think particularly in the housing debate, we get all three levels of government say, oh, there's not much we can do. That's a sort of local council issue. That's a state issue. And then the state being like, oh, actually, that's a federal thing. We need funding. And then all the way up and down. It happens all the time. But particularly at a local council level, local councils used to do public housing. They used to build public housing and maintain public housing and provide public housing. Local councils have heaps that they can do. They own heaps of land in the area. They can do stuff with them. They can also change the developer, the development and the zoning kind of framework to make it so that any new major development has to include, instead of the mandatory inclusionary zoning that is being fiddled around with and the affordable housing rubbish, they could make major developments built by major developers have to provide at least 10% of public housing as part of their development that they're going to profit massively from anyway, and then give that over to the local council. They could do that and make it, as long as it's built to the same standard as the rest of the development, or if not better, that's something that local councils could do at the drop of the hat if they wanted to.
I'm going to play devil's advocate here, because I would love to say that we could do that at the drop of a hat, but at least the case in New South Wales, and I totally agree with you, Jordan, that like it can be a bit of a blame game when it comes to the different levels of government. And as you guys have been talking about, this is such a complex, multifaceted issue. But for example, we've just recently had this the Minns government has just dropped this like miracle housing reform all over New South Wales, which is like, let's take town centres and rezone them just randomly. It's almost like they just put a circle on a map. So, oh, there's a bus stop there, town centre. Rezone them so that people can build low to medium rise housing in these areas. But when they did that, they didn't consult local councils at all. They didn't say, do you have the infrastructure to do that? And they also didn't create any sort of value capture. So like that's what we're doing on a local government level, where we say, okay, 5 to 10% of that needs to be for affordable housing. State didn't do that at all. And that is just such a missed opportunity, because all the homeowners in that area just got richer overnight. And,
absolutely, yeah.
And it's just a ridiculous, the policy, it's like, I'm obviously new to politics. I'm young. Housing's not even my specialty, but I can see that this is just stupid, because this is not going to help people trying to get into the market. It will create more supply, but somewhere that I live, like in the Northern Beaches, these houses are going to be just as expensive, if not more expensive, because all those residents are going to band together and make acquisition costs higher for the developer, who will come in, build it, have no affordable housing requirements apart from those put on by council. It's just silly. I don't know. So
absolutely.
and we could do a lot more as well if state would allow us to do things like charge higher rates on unoccupied or undeveloped land and properties. So Mike, you mentioned earlier you live in Manly. You would remember the old Manly cinema. That's been sitting empty for like a decade. Some Chinese foreign investor owns it and has not developed it, and that gets charged regular council rates. And I would love to jack those rates up, or jack up the rates on Airbnb. So there's so many more things that council could do if we could work cooperatively as well. So my little advocate thing.
It needs political.
That's an interesting thing, because
leadership. That's what it needs. And you're right about the Manly cinema. That's just down the road here. And the worst, most egregious case recently was, I noticed they're putting the public hospital back in public hands, the Northern Beaches Hospital. Finally, it's been a 10-year battle, but they've given to Brookfield, the property development mob from Canada, listed on Wall Street, they've given them the land to develop up the top of the hill where the old Manly Hospital was. And see, this is your problem. You know, these people, they were going to build youth mental health stuff and at least allocate some of that asset to that issue. But in the end, now apparently it's just going to be a retirement village looking over Sydney Harbour for ultra wealthy people. And so these political decisions, you know, they just have the corporations running rings around them. And Nick Moore, the former head of Macquarie Bank, who used to be the big rainmaker for Macquarie Bank, he came out the other day. He lives in Mossman, very wealthy suburb, and he was saying that it's NIMBYism that's the problem, not in my backyardism. Where, you know, they had plenty of development opportunities to allow people to allow construction to happen around the Mossman Neutral Bay area, and so the people could be closer to where they could live, closer to where they worked. But unfortunately, everything was opposed the entire time. The council developments and so on were opposed the entire time because of NIMBYism, because people didn't want any more building in their backyard. But, you know, then we get just decentralisation, and there's very little inspiration there politically to have decentralised cities and towns around Australia and decent infrastructure, rail links and so on.
So then obviously it's like a multifaceted, it's a multifaceted problem, right? But how because obviously this election coming up, it's the housing crisis election, you know. But then obviously, Bonnie, your election's not coming up for council for another 3.5 years. You know, how important would like a council election play into the housing crisis? Because everyone's focusing on federal, obviously. But with what you guys are talking about tonight, it kind of makes me think like, oh, we need to get council solutions on board more. But that's just not in the conversation, or at least not what I'm seeing.
Well, let me reframe what I've been saying about council. I think we have a lot of opportunity, and what I've tried not to go on a rant about because it's quite boring to a lot of people, but councils, and I can only speak to New South Wales specifically, are really chronically strapped for cash. Like the federal amount of the federal budget that used to go to councils halved in 1996 and hasn't gone back up. In terms of our relationship with state, we have to provide all these services that state used to provide, like the emergency service levy, blah, 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 things that cost tens of millions of dollars. And we're actually not allowed to charge residents for the amount of things that we have to provide. Like council is actively losing money, and most councils, to sort of rectify that, have a special rate variation, which have been very politically ugly. And my council's gone through one of those as soon as I got elected. I think I aged 10 years through that process. Or they're selling off all that public land, so they're actually not going to have the opportunities to build affordable social housing, and because they're just trying to, you know, rebalance their balance sheet. I wanted to really quickly touch on one thing that you mentioned before, Michael. You were sort of talking about the amalgamation of issues that feed into this housing crisis, and you mentioned immigration as a problem. I want to lightly challenge that, because I feel like immigration is something that's sort of becoming a little bit politicized this election, and it's a pretty easy target to punch down on. Like, if we, you know, stop the amount of people coming into this country, you know, then we'll have more supply available, blah, blah, blah. But just remember that when COVID happened and we had, you know, no one coming in, plenty of people had to leave, all our foreign students had to leave, house prices continued to surge. And I think it was like in the mid to late 2000s, we had a huge population jump, but housing prices only went up 9% in that period. And then in the last, since December 2019, our house prices have been up 28%. And that doesn't correlate with how many people have been coming into the country since then. So I would just be careful to, you know, conflate the two, because I think that's an easy political game that's been happening this election, and it's quite misleading in my opinion.
No, I agree with you, Bonnie, because
I think I might jump into that one.
It's overinflated, the idea, because politicians, xenophobia is a very handy tool for politicians to blame it on outsiders. So I agree with you. It's simply one factor. As I said, I think the main factors are the governments over the years, successive governments of both stripes, have got the policy settings wrong and turbocharged the market in favour of investors rather than home owners. And I think, we should be, as a society, looking at housing as a right, as a human right, to have a roof over your head as well as to be able to eat, just those basics. And so I agree with you. Immigration is one factor which needs to be managed, not cut out, but managed. But it shouldn't be used as a scapegoat for political gain.
Yeah, and we also have a lack
And something
of
that I want to add in there. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say we have a
You're
lack
right.
of skilled labour
I
to
might jump
build
in.
houses, and sorry, just one thing. We have a lack of skilled
good.
labourers actually available to build these houses, and obviously, immigration helps with that a lot. But then they need houses as well. So yeah, it is really complicated, and I appreciate you recognizing that. I just want to flag it because I'm really worried that people are going to latch onto that this election, and it's going to be really toxic for our social culture in Australia.
Agreed.
Well, something I want to jump on is that, like, when I did this video that we released yesterday about why you can't afford to buy a home, I did a lot of number crunching, looked at a lot of data, and sure, immigration is a factor when you look at just a supply and demand framing, but because the housing issue is so much bigger than that, it's way too easy to scapegoat immigration. And the biggest kind of counterpoint that I found to this immigration debate is that, you've got people coming in and they're working jobs and they're taking up houses, and then our rental stock is going all the way down, even though we've got vacant properties all over the country. But the big counter is, right, these migrants are coming in and they're renting, right? We don't have migrants that buy a lot in this country. We do have problems with foreign investment in dark money, sure. But the migrants that are coming over and renting, doing shorter stays, they aren't buying the houses, they're renting, right? So yes, supply and demand, but who are they renting from?
They
Right?
overwhelmingly join
More
existing
likely-
households. That's what the stats show. They're not taking.
Is that the case?
Yes, that's what the data shows.
Yeah.
Migrants who come to this country
Yeah.
overwhelmingly join existing households. They're not taking, houses away from us or anything like
It's
that.
like young people. They're staying with
Yeah.
mum and dad forever, So they're joining existing households also. So it's a crisis that has to be tackled, and the politicians of both major parties are not tackling the issue of, and the fixes are not that hard. We've talked about supply, and on the demand side, you've got this supercharging of investment returns and so much vacancy going on. I think we've pretty much tackled all the things, but the answers are there. That's the issue. The political will to address these things is not there. And
you need to remember that Labor and Liberal have both been seen historically taking, lobbying funding from property developers, and the importance of that can't be overlooked. It should be illegal, and I'm sure it is in ways, but it was proved that it occurred in the latest state election in Queensland. So yeah, this is the loveliest housing circle jerk I've ever been in. We all just agree.
Well, I mean, it's lovely to see.
Well, to be fair, I did reach out to some more conservative folk or some people on the opposite side of this issue, and I did not get a response. So, us as an independent outlet, we don't want to be an echo chamber for a lot of for these kind of issues. So we're more than happy to get suggestions on people who would want to come on and challenge us. That I'm happy to be challenged on my beliefs, as long as you can back it up. That's the main thing. And I find especially with that housing video yesterday, all the comments, I answered the question in the video, but they just kept going migration, and kind of just don't listen to the points that are putting past. So anyone in the comments today as well, if you've got any suggestions on anyone else who would like to be on this kind of show with Michael West Media, feel free to comment below. But yeah, I think we've definitely got some differences on how we can tackle the housing crisis. But I think we've got to start wrapping up this show very, very soon because we're almost over our time limit. But is there any final comments? I'll start with Jordan. Is there any final comments that you want to say on this before we head off?
Yeah, I'd say it's really disappointing to see the major parties just offer us nothing while people are really struggling. And I feel like what they'll find is that people are really pissed off. People are angry. And if they don't do something about it, people will take things into their own hands. And I think they should be afraid of that, because when that happens, the ruling class doesn't really come off better off.
It was in Tesla.
As history's shown. None of us own a Tesla, thank God. Any closing remarks, Bond, before we head off?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I've had a great time. I really want to echo what Michael Pascoe said. You know, the market got us into this. The market is not going to get us out of this.
Mm.
And I encourage everyone voting in this election, especially, you know, young people, first-time voters, Gen Z, millennials. We're making up biggest portion of the voting of the vote this time around. So it's really exciting. But if you're not
Officially,
sure,
yeah.
officially. So if you're not sure who you're voting for, go on ABC Vote Compass, do some research, and, you know, really find the candidate or party that aligns with you most, because it's really important to send a message, even if they're not going to get in. Send a message with your preferences, and, you know, keep them accountable.
And look, and that's kind of something that we encourage here as well. Make sure you're voting on policy rather than parties. So if you have interests that line up with a particular party, you should probably vote for them. So Vote Compass by the ABC is a great resource. Who do they vote for is also a great resource to check someone's voting history. You know, I'm not going to take names at the moment, but there's some people who say one thing and then they vote the other way. So it's always good to fact check it yourself. You know, I would never, ever want to say who to vote for, especially on a platform like this, but we encourage, especially punters, to go look for yourself. Go look at the policies that matter to you the most. And look, if you want negative gearing, you want more negative gearing, you want more handouts to investors because you are an investor, sure, vote for that because that is in your interest, but it goes the same way with everyone else. If that doesn't affect you, you probably want to vote for a party that is going to hopefully address that or has policies that can adjust that. Anything to add, Mick?
Oh, I'd just say I'm overjoyed to see the past couple of weeks since the election campaign. Well, it's really been going since January, but you know, politicians are suddenly coming up with all this stuff every day, all these reform ideas, and they're addressing the concerns of voters. Suddenly, it seems like the cycle is that we go through 3 years. Then, in the last month before an election, they stop listening to their corporate donors and start listening to the voters. And I think the bell has been rung loud and clearly, and housing affordability is the number one domestic issue in this country. And even those people with vested interests who want to vote for the negative gearing and the capital gains tax relief, which is natural because, you know, it's your money and you're not going to want to pay tax on it. I mean, these are the very strong things at issue, but the longer term future of Australia is not in good hands unless there is significant change to allow everybody access to housing, the basic human right in my view. And let's just hope that, I mean, I'm a bit of a fan of seeing the political duopoly dismantled because it has not served Australians well for the past 30 years.
Great. Well, look, that's a perfect time to wrap this up. So just after this, by the way, to our viewers as well, we're going to do a quick 5 to 10 minute Patreon only Q&A. We might select some from the comments as well. But if you join our Patreon, which is patreon.com/The West Report, you get exclusive access to these kind of perks. So we're going to jump over to our Patreon very soon and answer any questions that our patrons have had for the stream. But before we do that, I just want to thank our guests, Bonnie, Harvey, and Jordan Van Den Lam, otherwise known as Purplepingers. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today on our pilot episode. Despite the first hiccup in the first 10 minutes with the internet connection, I think it went pretty smooth.
Thanks for having us.
It was a joy. Thank you.
No worries, guys. We'll let you sign off, and Mick and myself will do our Patreon Q&A.
Sweet.
See you guys
Enjoy.
later.
Cheers.
So I'm going to go.
Thanks, Jordan. Thanks, Bonnie.
Mate, I think that went not too bad for a first run through, a first test pilot. Definitely room to grow. Definitely.
It's a bit rugged in the first 20 minutes of the NBN connection, mate. But
You know
apart from that,
well, Steph, well, we're still live, Steph. We are still live. Thank you, Steph in the chair, who's been helping us with the broadcast behind. Shout out. How good is... we might get you on camera one day. So we're going to do a quick fire Q&A from our Patreons as well. And also to our viewers, thank you for going through these teething issues with us. We We're an independent operation. We don't have billions of dollars of subsidies for like the fossil media. So we're giving it a go ourselves. I'm currently running this off a laptop in my home studio. So I think it's done all right. Any feedback is definitely appreciated. But Mick, I'm going to jump over to Patreon and get them to ask us some questions, if that's okay. Here we go. So on our Patreon, Cameron Brown, I might share this screen so we can see the viewers can see the questions as well. Let's go this one, and I'm going to go back to this one. I'm going to go back to group, and yeah, great. So Cameron Brown, we'll start with Cameron Brown. If Labor only win a minority, do you think that there is any real chance of them caving into any changes to negative gearing and or capital gains discounts? So if Labor gets into a minority government, will they double down on their capital gains stance, or will they be open to negotiation, do you think, Mick?
I think the next 3 years, I mean, as we just discussed, Cameron, the changing demographic, suddenly more younger voters rather than older voters in the total mix, means that it's inevitable that these questions are continually raised. These aren't the only ones. There's the Airbnb stuff as well. There's the supply side. But I think the Greens, obviously, if they're in a position where they've got some heft on blocking reforms and bringing other stuff to the table, then they're quite clear. They want CGT relief and negative gearing gone or reduced to one home, which I think is a good thing. Why do you need tax breaks? Why do you need to be cross-subsidised if you've got 5, 10, 20, 30 properties? It just doesn't make any sense. It creates too much leverage or debt in the system. Negative gearing is not a positive thing. It's a positive thing if you're a property investor. I think they've just got to go, yep, let's just keep it. I agree with the Greens on this one. Let's keep it to one home. Because at the moment, I think, Josh, you had a look at it, didn't you? See, when negative gearing is low, when interest rates are low, negative gearing is only a couple of billion to the budget. Now it's getting up towards 20 billion or something of that
27
order.
billion.
Now, how many houses could be built? 27 billion. How many houses could be built to create more supply if there's 27 billion unleveraged straight into the system in housing stock?
Well, even
I mean,
the ones
this
that
is
would be,
the issue.
Yeah,
it
the ones
favors...
that would be affected would be the 50% of the negative gearing and CGT benefits go to the top 10% of earners in this country, right? Who don't need these handouts. Yeah. They're the top 10% of earners. So
that's right.
We don't need to.
They don't need the handouts. But the problem, of course, is that when it gets to political debate, the ginger groups, the lobby groups come in and they say, oh, look at this policeman or teacher that's got a little negative geared property and you're getting rid of their tax breaks and so on, or the little old lady that bought a house in the 1970s for 300,000 it's now worth 15 million. You're taxing her out of existence if you address CGT. So you're always going to have lobby groups complaining in the political system, and you're going to have the media duopoly, which thank goodness is crumbling. The Nine Media and News Corp combined just act within the gambit of the political duopoly, and they don't act in the general interests of the public. And so you haven't got enough advocacy. But now that people have become much more aware in the past couple of years, social media, the proliferation of social media, young people are engaged because they need a roof over their heads. And so that will drive reform eventually. Now, whether, Cameron, it happens in this cycle or not will be very interesting. It'll be interesting to see come the election whether minor parties and third parties and independent candidates rise in numbers, get elected or not. And I think it is a good thing if they do, because they will put pressure for more fairness, because the independent candidates tend to listen to people in their electorates, not listen to what the party policy is, which is driven by people donating to the party.
That's an issue that actually I think it's talked about a lot. Yeah. Of course.
It's a good thing because if you're a member of the Labor or Liberal parties, and this isn't to slag them off as human beings, but your first fealty is to your own party and its policy. That's why they never step out of line like we're all, foreign policy AUKUS or housing. This is our position, and they never say anything because that's their gravy train. But the independents tend to listen to all the voices in their electorate because, they're not on pre-selection deals as the major political candidates are and the major parties. They've been elected outside that system. So they are better equipped to represent, and we deal as an independent media organisation with minor party people and independent candidates a lot more than the major party people, because you know what the major party people are going to say.
Well, look at the housing debate on Q&A on Monday night. It was talking point after talking point. Both Claire O'Neill and
it's just talking points, and
they just talk past the viewers. Like there's no longer any human element to it. But one like I might push back on it a little bit, Vic, because say you've got the independents, you've got the Teals, supposed Teals, who are backed. Most of them are backed by Climate 200. So wouldn't that also be the same issue as you described before, as behest to their party donors?
Well, no, that's a good question. They are independent, but they are sort of orchestrated a bit by Climate 200. And Simon Holmes à Court is very sensitive to accusations that they're a political party, which is what he cops from the major media. The guts of it is that the candidates are backed by Climate 200 if they're progressive on climate, on women's issues, and on integrity in politics. Those are the three things. So if you're on board on those three things, you can hold whatever view you like on things like Gaza or China or whatever, on defence or foreign policy. But on those three issues, you've got to be part of the team. So they are independent, but they do have those three compelling policy. Yeah, that's the guts of it, essentially. And look, frankly, they get bagged a lot, but they've been very good. In fact, Josh, I might just regale you with the story of. I saw it on Twitter today, on X.
Love your Twitter, mate.
In Canada, we've got. Yeah, I love it. Well, I don't love it that much, but you've got to be there. So there was a great story about this woman who was in a wheelchair. She was disabled and she'd lost faith in the ability to ever get her own place, which had the things which she needed to survive, basically. And so she, as a result of that, and she was wanting to take her own life under the euthanasia laws. Oh, I mean, it's a tragic story. It's latter stage capitalism where, somebody says, well, okay, I've got no hope of this through government policy and I'm depressed and therefore I want to take my own life and it's going to be a marquee case, obviously, because, it relates to government policy. She wants to be euthanized because she's depressed, because she can't find her own place to live. And Canada, of course, is very similar to Australia, where in the end, the corporatocracy has meant that government policy has favoured corporations and large investors over all people, over all citizens. And Canadian prices have outstripped both equity returns and and wages growth. So it's the same Canada as it is here, and it just shows that status quo. And that's why these latest two policies of both the major parties are a miserable failure, because all they do is entrench the status quo. They don't actually reform, because in this day and age, it's too hard to reform, because the minute you do try to do something significant for the benefit of all people, you get pushback from the lobby groups.
Yeah, no, completely agree. It's
we got one from Trish.
Yeah, we're gonna move over to Trish really quickly. Let's have a look. Or can you read it from there, Mick?
Yeah. Hey guys. Now, do you think I better get my glasses on. Can you bring it up again, mate? I can't see it.
Let's go.
Or you can read it.
Yeah, I can read it. Did that work? Yeah, so Trish Truth from our
Hey guys, how do
Patreon.
you think all the
Yeah.
crazy coming out of America is going to affect our election? Well, it's already affecting it because Labor has very smartly cornered Peter Dutton with the "you think Trump's a genius" thing, and you're enacting Trumpist sort of Doge-like policies. So they're already making hay because, of course, the timing is bad because Trump's honeymoon was over in a week. The minute he kicked off his tariff war and got everybody in the world upset with him. And so it's affecting our election big time because it's been used by Labor as a wedge against Dutton. And you can see Dutton's numbers in the polls have been sliding. I mean, it looks as though at this point it's falling apart at the seams, the Libs. And even today, Nikki Sava came out in the Herald, I think, and said that Angus Taylor's considering a challenge. So get good old Angus up against Peter. And the problem for the Libs is there's no policy much. Nuclear is a joke. And the problem is generally they don't appear to be competent. They're not instilling confidence that they're competent. They're just saying not Labor, elbows.
Left? Yeah, they backed down on their worker sacking of 31,000 public workers. They backed down on their Doge promise. What else did they backtrack on the last couple of weeks?
Well, to give them their credit, they did come up with the ban on foreign ownership for 2 years and only on existing property. Now that is a good thing because the problem is you don't want a society where you've got wealthy foreign buyers just parking their money here, just parking it to diversify their wealth, competing against first homeowners who live and work here and pay tax. And so it doesn't, so that was good. And Labor quickly matched it. They match everything, the majors. They matched the Medicare $8.5 billion. They matched the PBS reduction, the PBS fees.
Yeah, when a good policy is a good policy.
You've got this sort of matching process going on. But to Trish's question, I think Trish says Clive Palmer and the Trumpeter Patriots Party too. Well, he's not making any noise because, of course, Donald's blown up his pitch as well. I mean, he's advertising ubiquitously, but the Donald has blown up his pitch because Trump has disgraced himself, and it's a liability for anybody to be pinning their flag to the Trump mast at this point. And so I think it's all. I mean, the China stuff, and the foreign affairs stuff, it's all really comes down to domestic and who's going to manage the economy better. And that's why they're matching each other. You can understand why they're doing it. But of course, there's a stasis in real reform as a result. And so hopefully we'll get more miners in this time to have more of a say in the next parliament. But, there's a lot of money being spent. If you hop onto social media, like really bagging the minor parties, the Teals, the Greens, and any independents. So,
that kind of gives me an idea. Maybe we should do an episode. There's a lot of money in there. Yeah, maybe we should double down and do an episode on astroturfing.
I think we should definitely do it.
And dark money in politics.
I think definitely we should.
It's
definitely astroturfing because it's going to be big between now and polling day. I mean, astroturfing is out of control. Millions being spent, and you've got this sort of unholy alliance of climate deniers in there, the Advanced Australia people, married with the Zionist extremists on foreign policy, and the extreme right. And so these people, they're not beholden to truth in advertising laws because there aren't any. You can say whatever you want. And that's a problem for us because you're just going to get this massive misinformation campaign heading into polling day.
And I think to wrap up Trish's question, I think if we had the election close to Donald Trump's inauguration, things may have been a little bit different. It is on a purely optical level, seeing a strong, confident, charismatic leader such as Trump. I mean that in a purely optical way, of course. You'd be like, oh, I would want someone like that. I would want our own version of that. So another reason why, the coalition may have gotten a bump in the polls. But because of the train wreck that we're seeing in the US, I don't think that Australians are as crazy as Americans, to put it bluntly. I don't think we're as far gone. We're not in that much of a late stage capitalistic hellhole. You know, our medical system is still, while it has its problems, is still one of the best in the world. We still have the PBS. We still have some protections in our democracy that prevent oligarchs like Trump and Elon and all that kind of stuff. So thank God those features are built into our democracy, basically. So I don't think Australians going to go down the Trump route anytime soon, and it definitely, I don't see it working in Dutton's favour. But I think that's time to wrap it up, guys. We're a little bit over time because we had a bit of a late start, but thank you so much for your comments as well. We're going to be doing more of these kind of things. If you guys enjoyed it, please give it a subscribe, give us some feedback below, or if you want to talk to us directly, subscribe to us on patreon.com/thewest-report. We appreciate your patience with the teething issues at the start, but the rest of the stream went actually quite smooth. What do you think, Mick?
Went well from the 20-minute mark, mate. We'll have to iron out a few issues, but you never know unless you give it a go, do you? So well done, Josh. Thanks to everybody, and we'll catch you on the next round.
Excellent. I think that's a good sign off. Thank you so much, guys. We will see you when we're looking at ya. Catch ya.